Well, in the summer of 1609, a fleet of English ships set sail from Plymouth, England, bound for the struggling colony of Jamestown, Virginia. This flagship was called Sea Venture, and it was loaded with people, it was loaded with food, and it was loaded with hope of a new beginning. And one day, in late July, the red skies in the morning showed what was to come. The sky darkened, and soon the ship was caught in a hurricane, or what was called a nor'easter, or a northeaster, the kind of storm that feels alive, the kind of storm that feels angry, and it's the kind of storm that the most mature sailors fear. And so for 3 days and 3 nights, the Sea Venture was battered by wind and wave. The timber split, the sails tore, and the crew's hands were bloodied as they pumped water out day in and day out. And they prayed, and then they despaired, and honestly, they waited to die because they saw no way out. Yet, when all seemed lost, the captain spotted land, reefs in the green outline of an island, and it turns out they were right off the shore of Bermuda. And so he drove the ship aground, the hull shattered there on the reef and the rocks, yet every soul survived. They salvaged the wreck, they built new vessels from the planks, and months later they completed their voyage. So out of disaster came a glorious deliverance, out of wreckage came renewal, and out of the storm came a viral story. See, their incredible story spread all across England and throughout Europe with gathering force. And one man who heard the account, his name was Bill. Bill was rather a genius. Some called him Will. Others called him William Shakespeare. And so William decided to write a play based upon what he heard. And can you guess what play that was? Not Romeo and Juliet, okay. The Tempest in 1611. And its opening scene begins the same way. There's violence of wave and wind. There's panic of sailors. There's crash and chaos and catastrophe. But by the final act, what seemed like ultimate destruction becomes the setting for renewal and the setting for redemption. There's a character named Prospero who's kind of like a godlike magician, and he declares at the very end, "No harm done." See, the storm was not meant to destroy, but to bring about something greater. And that's not just great theater, that's great theology. Because what Shakespeare's getting at in his brilliant play is that the storm is not punishment, but it was providence. For Shakespeare, the storm becomes a swirling stage for grace to dance upon. Well, long before the Tempest and long before the Sea Venture, there was Acts chapter 27. And so into the storm we go today with Paul. Now, as I was studying this text this week, I found it interesting that this is the longest narrative section in the book of Acts that isn't a sermon. It's not a long speech, and it's not specifically a miracle account. It's a shipwreck. But then I thought, no, I'm totally wrong on this. As I soaked in the text, I realized that the shipwreck is a sermon, that the shipwreck is a miracle account that points us to the glory of King Jesus. The shipwreck speaks volumes about the grace of God and his loving power. So let's set the context really briefly. Paul has been in prison for 2 years in Caesarea Maritima. He is on the coast of Israel. Now, he's been on trial time and time again, and the religious, or not the religious leaders, but the political leaders keep proclaiming that he's innocent. And Paul has appealed to Rome. He's like, send me to Caesar. I want to be in front of Caesar, because he wants to take the gospel into the heart of culture so that heart of culture then can pump it throughout the arteries of the world. He wants to see Jesus proclaimed before Caesar. So he appeals to Caesar. And now he's about to get what he wants. He is headed off to Rome. God has promised he would get Paul to Rome. But there's troubled seas ahead, even though God has made his promise. So let's get into the text. I'm going to do a lot of reading, let the story lead us forward. It's a beautiful, dramatic, powerful story. So we're going to go through the whole text here in chapter 27. Verses 1 through 5, obedience meets resistance. We're going to see how the winds were against them right away. So here we go, into the text. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports all along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day, we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. So just brief note here, already there is resistance right at the start of the journey. And it's going to thicken, it will increase. Verses 6 through 8, with difficulty. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete of Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Now, Luke says, when it was decided that we should sail for Italy. So, in other words, what's happening here is Paul is put on a prisoner transport in order to head to Italy. So he's put on this prisoner transport. It's actually a commerce vessel that's going to haul grain. See, Egypt was the granary of Rome, and so big shipments of grain are going to go to Rome so that the Romans can eat bread during the winter. And this was a supply transport with a bunch of prisoners on it. Now, Paul's accompanied by Luke. So if you notice in here, he keeps saying we. Luke is on this journey. And Luke writes this incredible narrative. This is so unique from the ancient world to have this kind of seatime, maritime adventure narrative. And he nails all the geography. He nails all the meteorological details. They can reconstruct this whole thing today based upon what he says. It's so accurate and it's so detailed. Okay, so Luke is on this journey. So is a guy named Aristarchus. They're friends with Paul. And there's a centurion in charge of this whole thing. His name is Julius. He's a decent man. He shows restraint, and he's about to learn more about God's grace than he bargained for. So he's along for quite the ride. Now what happens here is they sail along the coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. They hug the shoreline to avoid open seas. That's what it means to be on the lee of an island. It's blocking the wind so they don't get battered around. They transfer to another ship. This is an Alexandrian grain ship as well. And so this is a big ship. This is about 140 to 180 feet long. And so it's good at transporting grain, but it's not so good at navigating squalls and going through typhoons. Luke soon notes, he's like, man, the winds were against us. You need to know from the start this was going to be a rough voyage. Everybody take your Dramamine. Here we go, is what Paul is getting at and Luke is getting at here. So the labor is slow going. They edge along the coast of Crete. They reach a harbor there called Fair Havens. But at this point, it's pretty late in the season. Fall is deep underway. The fast of the Day of Atonement, which we'll reach in the next passage, is past. And what this means is it's danger season. It's danger season to be sailing on the Mediterranean. Verses 9 through 12. Now dangerous. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, because even the fast, the Day of Atonement, was already over, and that locates us in time, Paul advised them saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo on the ship, but also of our lives. In other words, what are you doing? We can't keep sailing. Do you know what season it is? But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there. In other words, they took a vote and they're like, we're going. On the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and then spend the winter there. Okay, so Paul is a man well acquainted with travel, right? Some scholars think Paul has traveled at least 3,500 miles on the sea. So this is not his first rodeo by any way, shape, or form. And he says, men, I perceive that this is going to go bad for us all. I know the weather patterns. I know your proverbs. I know sailing wisdom. And so he's not so much prophesying doom here as much as he is reading the signs of the weather, the lateness of the season. This is just common sense. This is wisdom expressing itself. Because again, sailing the Mediterranean in October was dangerous, but traveling from November 11th on until early March was just insanity. In fact, it was crazy. So that they had a term for it called mare clausum, which means the sea is closed. The way is shut. Like you do not go unless you have a death wish. Now, there's an old mariner's proverb, which I'm sure some of you have heard, and it's simply this: red skies in the morning, sailors what? Sailors warning. Red skies at night, sailors delight. Anybody heard that one before? Yeah. So what's that getting at? Well, red sky at night means the setting sun is shining through dry, stable air, and a low pressure front isn't going to come in. So that means you're going to be good to go. But if you wake up and the west is red and the sky is red, it means that there's a low pressure system coming in. It's bringing in moisture, and it means watch out. Something's coming. So be prepared. I mean, Jesus himself even quoted this, right? Do you remember Jesus quoting this from Matthew chapter 16, verses 2 through 3? He's talking to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and they cannot read the times. They cannot see that the Savior has come. And so he says, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. In other words, he's like, you're just not operating with wisdom. You don't see what's happening. So what's happening here is Paul is simply showing forth his wisdom. Read the sky, guys. Heed the seasons. But the pilot, the owner, and the majority decide to risk it. They want to get the grain to Rome because they want to get paid. And before they do that, they want to go to another port that's a little more plush. It's a little more comfortable so they can have some fun in the winter season while they wait till the weather passes. So they want to go to a port just 40 miles away. The weather seems fine for the moment. They're like, look, it's fine. Like the fair breeze, let's go. So they gamble on this fair breeze. But notice something here. Paul is being dragged into something that he would rather not be, right? Paul has been faithful. Paul has been obedient to God's calling, but he is still going to be drawn into something painful and difficult because of the decisions of others. That happens to us sometimes, doesn't it? We are drawn into painful circumstances. We are drawn into suffering because of the decisions of others, because of others who are refusing God's wise ways. And so it affects us and it brings pain into our life. What do we do with that when we are drawn into something because other people bring pain into our life? Well, let's watch Paul and see what he does as he gets drawn into this storm because of the foolishness of other people. So the perfect storm, verses 13 through 20. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it, and we were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. That's the lifeboat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, They began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us. In other words, it was a crazy storm. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Okay, so at first, the gentle south breeze blows, and they're like, all right, this is exactly what we wanted. Let's go. But they weren't paying attention to the red sky that morning, and soon everything changes. A wall of black clouds forms and spills over the 8,000-foot Mount Ida that's on Crete, which means a bunch of cold air is going to come up over this mountain and down and rush across the sea. And suddenly the ship is caught in a northeaster. That storm is called a northeaster because guess which direction the wind comes from? The northeast and goes to the southwest. It's extremely dangerous. And the word that's used here in Greek for a tempestuous wind is typhonikos. Typhoon. It's where we get the word typhoon. So a typhoon hits this boat. These kind of storms happen swiftly, right? In the late fall and the winter of the Mediterranean, and they almost inevitably end in disaster because you have a big boat with a big old square sail, and it's hard to turn into the wind. You can't turn into the wind, so it just batters the side of the boat, drives you along, and then shatters the boat at some point. So here's what's happening. They manage to be driven along by the wind for a while. They go behind a small island there, and there they haul in the lifeboat because the lifeboat's just banging around down there. So they haul in the lifeboat. They end up wrapping ropes around the boat. By the way, I know nothing about sailing. This is just research, okay? I'm not a water guy. But they end up doing this thing called frapping where they put ropes around the hull of the boat because they're trying to hold the boat together, right? They're trying to tighten the timbers of the boat. So they do that. They start throwing stuff off to lighten the load, right? They jettison cargo. They throw over their tackle, all their supplies and their gear. So you know you're desperate when you're throwing over the things that you need to sail further because you're just trying to survive the moment. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's all going on. And then it says for many days they can't see sun or stars, which is kind of problematic because how do you navigate? By the sun and the stars, right? So now they're blind. They're blind in the storm. It's been days of chaos. So bad goes to worse, goes to nightmare. And it says, and this is such a human line, all hope of being saved was at last abandoned. They're just beat down. You've been there, right? Like things fall apart and you're like, there's no way it can get worse. And then you get that next phone call. And then you get the next phone call from the doctor. And then the school calls. And you're just like, how is this happening? How do I turn out of this? All hope of being saved was at last abandoned. They think they're going to die. This is the lowest point of the voyage. And this is where God's voice speaks into it. Isn't that how he works? Like just when you think you're just like licking rock bottom and you can't go any lower. Grace speaks. Grace speaks. So look at the word of hope, verses 21 through 26. It says, since they had been without food for a long time, they're probably not all that hungry. I think they're a little nauseous at this point, right? Paul stood up among them and said, men, you should have listened to me. This is so great. And not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. That's a great sentence. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God, and it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. So here it is. All hope is lost. In comes the word of grace from God. Light shines into the darkness. Paul stands up and he delivers that hope. And notice how he begins. You should have listened to me. Okay, but this is not him being smug. This is him being sober. This is not ego. This is him pleading with them. This is not snarky, I told you so. This is realistic. Here, I told you the truth before. I'm about to tell you the truth again. God has spoken to me. Please For the sake of your lives, listen to what I have to say. For an angel of the Lord came and said," and then he recounts what the angel said. And then he says this incredible sentence, this God to whom I belong, this God to whom I worship. So important that we acknowledge this, because Paul doesn't anchor his courage in strategy and seamanship. He anchors it in belonging. The God to whom I belong has told me what is going to come about, so it will come about. So what need do I have to fear? He is trustworthy fully, 100%. And this is so key, because what happens here, we see that bravery is born of belonging to God, not white-knuckling courage, but we know whose we are. So his identity is known, and then he operates out of that identity. So all his actions are going to be coming forth from his identity as one who belongs to God. Now, this is incredible. This is what allows him to stand in the storm when others collapse, because he knows whose he is. One other thing, this has hit me so hard this morning as I was praying early over the text, going, God, is there something that I missed in here? There's this line here. It says, "And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you." What does that mean? God has granted you? What does that mean, God has granted Paul this? What has Paul been doing? He has been praying for all of those on the ship. He's not like, "Save my bacon." He's saying, Save the crew, save these prisoners, save my captors, save the centurion, save us. He has been praying for his enemies on this vessel. Usually when pain and crisis comes, where's our attention turned? Like, me. And Paul has been praying, and God answers his prayer and says, "I will grant you all that you ask for on the ship. 276 souls will be saved." You have stood in the gap and interceded on their behalf. Friends, are we standing in the gap, interceding on behalf of those who are being crushed by the storms in this world? Stand in the gap, intercede. And I know for some of you, a name is coming right to mind. Pray for that person. You know the storm that they and their family are in. You know what's happening. Pray for them. Pray for them. Through one faithful man, grace extends to everyone on board. Guys, this is the opposite of Jonah. Isn't this wild? Why does the storm come to the sailors in the book of Jonah? Because Jonah's on board in his rebellion, and because of his rebellion, he brings the storm on board, and they're all under threat. And so what's the solution? Like, throw him overboard, right? So we can live. It's the opposite here, right? Because Paul is there, they will be saved through the storm. It's like the opposite of Jonah. It cracks me up. And so Paul says, take heart, for I believe that God will do exactly as he has said. Take heart. Anybody here read Narnia? Any Narnia fans? Okay, I got to get a Lewis or Tolkien reference in here. So the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there's a point where they're out on this boat and they go to what's called the Dark Island, and it's the darkest of the dark parts of the book, and it just looks like there's no hope. And it's in the middle of that darkness, in the middle of the storm, that Aslan, the lion, the Christ figure, whispers into Lucy's ear. He says, "Take heart, dear one. Take heart, dear one." And I just wonder if Lewis was reading Acts 27 when he was writing this, because it's literally the same situation. There's a ship, it's about to be a catastrophe, and into that the voice of God speaks and says, "Take courage," or take heart. Here's something, though, that we need to acknowledge. Paul's not saying that the ship will survive, right? He's like, the ship's going to shatter, but God's promise will hold. And all of us will survive, no matter what happens to the vessel that we're in and clinging to. So, before you chart your next move amidst the storm, get anchored in your identity. Recall who you are. I belong to God. I am a beloved child of God. I am in the palm of his hand, and his hands hold the seas. And when fear rises, speak Paul's line aloud. It will be exactly as God said. In the storm, remind yourself, take heart, O my soul, for I belong to God. Now, notice this as we move forward. This promise is not a promise of ease, is it? It's not a promise that the storm won't have severe consequences, because it will. So let's continue on. Verses 27 through 32, cut away the ropes. It continues. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea about midnight, the sailors suspected that we were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. In other words, they realized the sea is only about 120 feet deep there. A little farther on, they took another sounding again, and they realized 15 fathoms, 90 feet. We're getting closer to land. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern, and we prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, they had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. And Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat, and they let it go. They were about to bail at this point, okay? All right, the needed meal, verses 33 through 38. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it, and he began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing away the wheat into the sea. Okay, so 2 terrifying weeks adrift. They drop 4 anchors because they're going to stay here overnight because they can't see and they don't want to run aground. As they do, the sailors, okay, it's the sailors, it's those who know how to navigate the boat. They sneak to the bow and they're going to hop in the lifeboat and they're going to bail. Now, why is this problematic for everybody else who's on the boat if the drivers of the boat are gone? Right? It makes sense. So Paul is saying, no, God promised that we would all survive, not just you in your self-preservation, because if you, as the experts of navigation, leave us, what are we going to do? So he tells the centurion, tell them no. So they cut the lifeboat. Lifeboat gone, okay? So that seems counterintuitive. So now the lifeboat is gone. And then Paul's like, okay, we need to eat. We need to eat. You guys haven't eaten. I know you're sick as a dog, right? But you need strength. You need strength for what is ahead. See, Paul's exhibiting common sense and wisdom amidst all of the panic. Now, this brings us to our last scene, the shipwreck and the mutiny, verses 39 through 44. So when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors, and they left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. There was two rudders, and they would tie them together so they wouldn't go crazy in the storm. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan now was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to make for land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. So there it is. All were brought safely to land. Okay, so imagine 14 days on this turbulent ocean, right? And imagine the relief when they finally saw an outline of land, the coastline there. They didn't know which island it was. Turns out it's Malta. But what happens is hope's rekindled, right? But then the guards are like, oh no, if somebody swims the land and a prisoner's gone, this is problematic. Why is that problematic for a centurion? What? Yeah, they'll die, right? Because if the prisoners in your charge escape, You, as the Roman soldier, you die. You take that hit for them. So they're like, well, we're not going to die on account of all them. So they get ready to commit mass mutiny and mass murder. There's 200 plus souls that aren't navigating this, that aren't soldiers. So they're going to kill 200 plus people, while the waves are destroying this boat. Like, it went from hope to like even worse, a worse situation somehow. So the Greek implies here that the ship hits this sandbar or the shoal, this reef out there. So it's like wedged in, it's stuck, and the waves are pounding, and it's literally splintering this ship from the back up to the front while all this chaos happens. Now, Paul talks with the centurion, Julius, and Julius, being an agent of God's grace, a Roman centurion, being an agent of God's grace, stops the mass murder from happening, because again, Paul intercedes this kill them all order. Grace intervenes. Then he says, swimmers, who can swim? Someone raised their hand, and he says, you first, hop overboard, and go. And then that gives some time to collect more flotation devices for those who can't swim. See, wisdom is in operation here. And then those are going to then make their way to the island, and eventually they are all saved. It's incredible. Great. That's a cool story, an amazing story. But what do we do with that? Because Scripture tells us that all Scripture is God-breathed and it's profitable for teaching, reproof, and correction. Like, what do we do with that besides taking some ideas of what to do the next time we go on a cruise in the Mediterranean, just in case things go south? What do we do? Acts 27 is not just an adrenaline story about a storm. It is a story about apprenticeship to Jesus in the storm. And that applies very much to us. How do we walk with God when the skies turn red and then turn dark and the waves kick up and it looks like things are falling apart? I want to talk just about a couple anchors for us as followers of Jesus who will be going through storms. And the first one is simply this: we will be going through storms. Faithfulness to God's call does not promise fair skies. Faithfulness to God's call does not promise fair skies. Storms will come to us all. Paul was where he was supposed to be. He was on mission. He was in the will of God. He was obeying God, and still the winds rose because he found himself in a situation because of the foolishness of other people. So following Jesus will take you through hard seasons that you did not choose and would never script. But do not interpret storms as divine punishment. They can be, but they're not always divine punishment. And on the flip side, don't interpret all fair skies as divine pleasure, because God gives us over to our sin and things seem like they're going great when really we're heading towards the rocks. I have a picture in my office by Rembrandt. It's called The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Here's a picture of it. And I have this on my office wall because I want it to remind me of the fact that not just in pastoring, but in life, storms are going to come. And so don't be surprised, like, how is this happening to me? It's like, no, this happens to us in this world. So I have it there to remind me about the storms. But zoom in real quick. I have it there to remind me, like, I could be like this, this guy, the terrified helmsman at the back who's trying to control the ship, but he's losing to the storm. Or I could be like those hauling the rigging who are up there working frantically to no avail. I could be like the guy in total panic who's up there kind of in the shadows, up kind of to the bottom top. I could be like this guy. He's my favorite. See him down in red at the bottom? He's puking over the side. I've been in a lot of seasons where I just want to vomit over the side of the ministry ship going, I can't do this. I can't do this. Or I could be like the guy who's near hidden above the guy in red who's puking. There's a guy whose hands are folded. There's a little halo around his head. He's in the shadows, but he's trusting Jesus and he's praying to Jesus. That's the guy I want to be. Or there's Rembrandt himself. See the guy in the blue or the teal and he's looking at you? That's Rembrandt. He painted himself in there to look at you, to draw you in and say, I'm in the storm, you're in the storm. Who are you going to be like? Are you going to be like the guy right behind me who's praying to Jesus, trusting him? Or are you going to freak out and try to control it yourself? And then, of course, there's Jesus in the defining center. Jesus is the defining center. The storm isn't the defining center. His peace is not the absence of wind, but the authority over it and his presence within it. Obedience doesn't exempt you from the storms of this world. God is not punishing you because you're in a difficult season, but in those difficult seasons, he is doing deep work in you, through you, that his glory might be made known. And this is not to minimize the pain of the storms that we go through. Faithfulness to God's call does not promise fair skies. Storms come to us all. Take heart. He's with us in them. Next, belonging emboldens bravery. When everything was falling apart, Paul didn't say, I know what to do. He said, I know whose I am. When it's all falling apart, start first with, I know whose I am, and then ask, Lord, what do I do? Let that embolden bravery. Identity before activity, belonging births that bravery. And then C.H. Spurgeon, when he was a great pastor, preacher, when he was writing about this very text, he wrote this sentence. I don't have it up here, but he says, the presence of a brave man in the hour of danger is a very great comfort to his companions. He argues that Paul becomes a comforter, kind of an infectious, courageous person in the middle of the storm. Like, do you realize that your trust in God can catalyze hope in others who are just on the verge of breaking? That you being a calm presence in the middle of a storm that says God will fulfill his promises. I don't see it, I don't know how, but he will. Take heart. Do you know how that can change the ambience or the atmosphere of the boat you're in that feels like it's going down, and help you then look to the one who has our destiny in his hands? Be a hope bearer. Inject faith into a situation. Catalyze hope in others by remembering who you are and whose you are. The third point I would say is this: obedience is better than escape. When fear peaks, what do the sailors try to do? Get in the lifeboat, we're out of here. They are tempted towards what you could say is self-rescue, a shortcut, right? It's a panic move. But Paul says, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. And the reality is, like, when you're in pain and when it's all falling apart, the path of a quick and selfish escape looks easier. It might look easier, but it will lead to ruin. And the path of obedience looks harder, but it will lead to life. And so we are to trust God's promises, to not jump ship, to stay where he has placed us until he says, move. God's promise and his blessing is found in the path of obedience, not in the lifeboats of self-rescue. And there's a lot of ways we jump into the lifeboats of self-rescue, where we grab the rudders and say, I'm going to do this. Obedience is better than escape. The next one is pray for others in the storm. Pray for others in the storm. Again, that verse, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Paul has been praying. And again, when we're in storms, we just unconsciously, reflexively go self-focus. But one of the things that carries us through storms of depression, storms of anxiety, storms of insecurity, storms of pain, is not focusing fully on ourselves, but like turning that focus outward and asking the Lord to bless others around us. And God honors that in so many incredible ways. So pray for others in the storm. Let love lead you out of selfishness into caring for others. And then this one, this is amazing. Paul has a little mini Eucharist. He has a little like breaking of bread and blessing. He's like, let's eat, let's get strengthened. Oh, by the way, I'm going to pray to my God, and we're going to have a little worship moment here. He gives thanks in the storm, doesn't he? He gives thanks in the storm. Give gratitude in the gale. Gratitude doesn't deny the storm's fury. It defies the storm as ultimate. Gratitude doesn't deny the storm's fury. It defies the storm as ultimate, and it sees it as a place that God can enter into with his kindness and change it from the inside out. So give thanks in the storm. And then lastly, partner with God and do the next wise thing. Acts 27 is this awesome dance of divine promise and human action, God's divine sovereignty and human agency. God says, yes, all will live. Yet Paul tells them a number of things to do. They undergird the ship. They drop anchors. They eat for strength. They cut away the false lifeboats. In other words, there's wise next steps to do, even though God has made his promise. Trust God fully. Do the next wise thing in your situation. Seek counsel. Take practical steps. Take care of your body. Eat well. Sleep well before you make that big decision that will alter the trajectory of your family's life. Engage the common sense basics. Faith is never passive. It is active dependence and walks in wisdom. So, those things, I pray they will help you hold on to these truths. But here's what I want to say as I come to a close, and I need to come to a close. All of this, every anchor of hope, every reason to take heart in the storm is only possible because of Jesus. Because Jesus entered into the cosmic storm for us on the cross. Jesus entered into the furious gale of sin and judgment. He faced the crushing waves we deserved, and he entered into the storm that we could not survive. And his body, like Paul's ship, was broken apart so that you and I could be carried safely home on the planks of his grace. And our various ships in life they will shatter at some point. Our bodies will give up at some point, but his promise holds. He's faithful. He didn't flee from the storm. He didn't cut his lifeboat and be like, I'm out of here. You're a bunch of jerks. He said, forgive them while they crucified him. He did not flee. He entered further in so that forgiveness could be meted out. He be saved. He drowned in judgment so we could then rise in mercy. And so this is so cool, guys. The whole journey of Acts 27 becomes more than a survival story of adrenaline and then some principles of apprenticeship to Jesus. It becomes a gospel parable. A righteous man suffers with the guilty. The storm rages, violence comes, yet through his calm and trusting presence, all are saved. Who am I talking about? Yes, Paul and Jesus. A righteous man suffers with the guilty, the storm rages, violence comes, yet through his calm and trusting presence, all are saved. This is what Christ has done for us. This is what Christ has done for us. He's entered into our storm and the ship. His presence and the suffering and the violence he undergoes and his interceding on our behalf saves us. So incredible. So, Back to Shakespeare really quickly and the Tempest. The storm that seemed like punishment was overseen by God's providence. The character in there named Prospero, he's kind of, again, that godlike magician. He's talking with his daughter who's terrified at one point, and he tells her, no harm, I have done nothing but in care for thee. I have done nothing but in care for thee. What she saw as destruction and pain, God in his providence would use for good. Because Jesus entered the ultimate tempest for us, the storm that should have destroyed us becomes the place where grace dances on the stage of our life and delivers us. The tempest threatens to undo us, doesn't it? But it is a stage of God's grace. So when the sky turns red, when the winds rise, when the ship creaks beneath your feet, and it will, take heart. May these anchors help you. May you remember at least one or two of them in the midst of the storm. And remember this, your Savior has already gone into the storm for you. He is in the storm with you. He will bring you home plank by plank, promise by promise. Father, you're so good to us. It is incredible. You do not just fix something from afar, but you come and you enter into our splintering ships of lives, and you bring hope, and you embolden us. You give us courage. You give us grace. You help us to give thanks when it doesn't seem like there's anything to give thanks for. Father, I know there's people in this room who walked in and it just seemed like there was no hope left. You know You know their situation. You know the fall and the step and then the next fall and then the next storm that came into their life. Lord, would you meet them now in a moment of grace? Would you encourage them? Would you, through this message and through the scripture, take courage, dear heart. I just want to thank you for your love and your grace. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for dying in our place. Thank you for climbing up on the timbers of a broken world called the cross and dying that we might live. We love you, Jesus. We need you. Open up our eyes to your beauty. Help us to trust you in whatever storms come our way. We love you in the name of Christ. Amen.